All right, so I'm going to walk you through sort of a deck. The framework that I've been working on is I'm calling priority mapping. I got quite a few slides to go through. I'm usually doing this at a whiteboard, so we'll hold the questions until the end, and then we can run through. You can sort of queue them up in the chat if you don't want to forget them or whatnot. It is a lot of content. I'm in the process. I've published half of it on my website, so you can go and read more about it. And then Blake can share my email address, and you can ask me more questions if you have any questions sort of after the fact as we go. The whole thing, I have to keep switching screens here. So the whole thing we're trying to accomplish here is to have everybody agree on the strategy. It's important when you have 2 people, and it's important when you have 1,000 people, is to get everybody alignment. The minute you go past yourself, the most important thing, or the thing that slows companies down the most, is just misalignment or miscommunication, or misunderstandings of what the actual strategy is. Generally what happens is that companies have a big vision. So they have some sort of billion-dollar vision, and that just means a lot of things to do. So there's a lot of sales activities we've got to do. There's a lot of marketing, customer success, product, features, engineering, design, all sorts of items or things that we could do, and now we need a way to prioritize them and get everybody aligned to them. So my answer to getting everybody aligned is better segmentation and habits. What are the company habits that we need to do? So let's start with your billion-dollar market, and then we want to break it up. I call it squares. The way I break it up is if you take your billion-dollar vision and you put customer segments along the top and customer problems along the left, we can start breaking up your market into smaller and smaller squares, which is just segmentation, and it just allows us to get specific. The intersection of your problems and your customers is really the solutions. It could be your solutions, or it could be the current solutions that they're already using to solve that problem. One of the mistakes I think people make when they're defining their market, they define their market in the solution space. So they say, oh, nobody else has a blockchain or an AI or some sort of technology solution like ours. But the reality is pen and paper will work just as well to solve the problem for that customer solution. And so when you're considering your market, it's much better to do it in the problem space so that you understand all the alternatives. They might not be direct competitors, but it's all the things that your customers are going to compare you against in order to solve their problems. So if we take Uber as an example, I find Uber is a great example because they were very, very successful, but it's something that everybody understands. So we'll just sort of be using Uber as our example as we run through the presentation, but we can definitely talk about afterwards how it applies to other types of businesses, other types of markets, and other types of revenue models. But Uber's multi-billion-dollar vision was to change transportation around the world. So if we look at their customer problems right now, they do their car service, they do Uber Eats, they have Uber Freight, and they even have helicopters called Uber Elevate, which I didn't know until I was researching this. And they do it around the world. They're global now. They're in every city. They're in every city in throughout the world, or in most cities throughout the world. And they're a multi-billion-dollar company now. But they didn't start there. They started in San Francisco, targeting affluent people, only doing cars, and with their Uber Black service. They stayed there until they were arguably making about $1 million. So they launched Uber Black in San Francisco to great fanfare, got great adoption. all over the world, people were asking for it. They didn't make $10,000 and then start expanding. They didn't make $100,000 and start expanding. They sort of stayed there in that one square until they were making roughly $1 to $2 million. They raised their Series A round, and they focused. That allowed them to build up not only their product, but their playbook. So their way to acquire customers, their way to deliver customers, their way to acquire drivers. And they were able to harden that playbook before they looked to expanding. I don't think I have access to it here, but I should have set it up with Blake before, but to do a polling feature. But they had two options to expand. So we know Uber now as they're everywhere and they have multiple product lines. And so the question is where did they go after being successful in San Francisco with their black car service? Did they take their black car service and did they go around the world to other cities? Or did they stay in San Francisco and go and launch UberX to go against to acquire the other 95% of users inside of their existing market? When I ask founders this question, or when I ask anybody this question, I usually get a 50-50 answer. And the answer is for Uber, is they took their Uber Black and they went to Chicago, New York, Toronto, and Paris. And so why did they do that? Well, what they're trying to do is change as little as possible. So they had a playbook that already worked in San Francisco with their Uber Black service. Their product was complete, their driver onboarding was complete, their marketing message was complete, their customer service stuff was complete, their technology was complete. They didn't have to change anything to go to Chicago, New York, Toronto, or Paris. That's the fastest path to growth for the company, is to look for squares where we have to change as little as possible. So our goal is to find something that works, our playbook, and keep doing it more often. In Uber's case, their Uber Black in San Francisco was $1 million playbook. And so when they went to Chicago, New York, Toronto, and Paris, all of a sudden they took $1 million playbook and went copy, paste, 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 and they're a $5 million company. That's the most capital efficient way for them to grow in the short term. Whereas taking their playbook in San Francisco and trying to launch UberX would require changing their messaging, changing their onboarding, their driver onboarding, changing their product, changing their pricing model. A lot of changes would have to go into place rather than taking one thing that already works and expanding. Basically, most companies that I come across don't have a product problem, they have a prospecting problem. Most companies have something that works or something that at least kind of works. But what happens is they defined a massive vision and they told their salespeople, go sell to anybody inside of this vision. And then their product team or their engineering team goes, yeah, but our product doesn't work for everybody. And so what happens is we start getting customers all over our vision, and our internal operations goes into triage mode. Well, do we build this feature for the customer, or do we build this other feature for this other customer? But every feature we're building only works for some of our customers. That's just not a capital efficient way to grow, and especially when we have limited resources as a smaller company. Now, I would argue, and in the bigger companies that I've been part of, they still have this problem. No company has enough resources, and so you have to prioritize that at every stage of it. It's just the problems the problem's worse with smaller companies. Essentially, we're always just looking for the least path of resistance to grow. Now, sometimes that's the same product and different customers. So that's the Uber Black going to different cities model. But sometimes it's actually cheaper and easier and faster to take the same customer and do different products or different problems for that customer. So if you look at SpaceX on the other extreme, they're probably not going to be able to find more NASAs to go and win customers and just do one mission for them. So they're going to go deeper, obviously, with NASA, right? And so they're going to do mission over mission over mission and over mission and try to do more and more and more with that exact same customers. Those are really our two extremes. Most companies with moving to SaaS, our ACVs are moving more and more, are moving smaller. And so you're going to, most likely your path of growth is going to be same product, different customers. But we kind of start migrating into longer sales cycles as we move into enterprise, bigger contract values. And so sometimes it is more effective and cheaper for us to actually just go deeper and deeper with those existing customers. So every company is different, and it changes as our company grows, because as Uber went same product, different customers, at some point they had enough customers that upselling existing customers and just moving down to selling new things to those customers. So for example, Uber Eats is largely an upsell to their existing customers. When they only had a couple million customers in San Francisco, it's not worth it for them to launch a whole new product line to sell it to a couple tens of thousands of customers in San Francisco. But when you have tens of millions of customers, the incremental upsell from Uber Eats was massively successful for Uber. So when I look at squares, there's the concept of squares that are nearby. So that's Uber Black in San Francisco and Uber Black in Toronto. And there's the concept of far away squares, Uber Black in San Francisco versus Uber X in San Francisco. The distance between the squares is just related to what's the effort involved or the speed involved in moving a new square from gray to green. What's involved for becoming successful in any new square we move to, and how long or how hard is it going to be for us? And we're always looking for the fastest or easiest square that we can become successful in once we have something that works. So when I look at taking a vision, a big complex problem like your vision, and breaking it down into its component parts, as squares, they become your building blocks to how we put together your strategy. And so we can think of strategy or your squares into three simple states. You have squares that work, some that kind of work, and some that don't work yet. And with that, change the way we spend money on our different segments. So we can take more of our resources and spend it on the squares that work or kind of work. We can spend less resources on exploration, or we can spend more on exploration and less on squares that work if we're in a dying market. It gives you a bit more fine granularity in terms of thinking about how you move your chips around the board. I kind of always think of it as, think of this as like those old medieval military movies where they're looking at a map on a table and they're sort of moving their pieces around the board to try to figure out where they're moving them. What I notice is that most companies just treat all squares as equal. And so they're like, oh, I'm in 10 squares. I'm going to put 1/10 of my resources on all 10 squares. And what we want to do is we want to get the most out of our squares and spend the least amount in that square to do that. And we want to right size our investment on a segment by segment basis. When we're doing short-term exploration, we want to look for nearby squares. So if we want something to work in the short term, we want to look nearby. When we're doing long-term exploration, we want to look far away. So think of a marketing budget. So if I gave you $100,000 to spend on marketing, you'd run a bunch of experiments, and you'd find some tactics that work, some tactics that kind of work, and some tactics that don't work yet. When you're running your initial experiments and you have nothing that works, you're better off looking, or at least considering, tactics that are different from one another. So those are far away tactics. Okay, so you're better off considering, well, I don't know, should we use Google, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter to do our ad campaigns, or LinkedIn? You're much better off considering which platform would work rather than just going, Facebook's the best place for us to advertise, and let's start A/B testing our creative. Because we don't know that Facebook is the right platform for us. That's an assumption until we actually run our campaign. Once we've run some experiments, or once we've chosen our platform, we now have a tactic that works. Nearby tactics would be A/B testing that platform. So let's say Facebook is the platform that we go with, A/B testing our creative, A/B testing our copy. That would be nearby tactics. Doing some part of our budget exploring for long-term tactics would be testing LinkedIn or Google or other platforms, so that we can look for changes in return on investment. So we know what Facebook will return for us. The reason why we look for different things is we're basically looking for, is there something else out there that has a better return on investment? What happens if Facebook goes away? What happens if it stops working for us? What happens if it gets a crowded marketplace? What other tactics that are different for us that we can switch to? Over time, we obviously just want more squares to be green. So over time, we want more and more tactics that we can use. We want more and more diversity in where we're getting our money from. More and more customers, more and more customer problems. That's our goal of a company. The more and more squares that we're looking at, the more diversified our company is, the more predictable and repeatable and bulletproof our company is. One thing we have to remember, though, is that every time we move to a new square, we start as gray again. It is an assumption. You can't assume that because it works in San Francisco, it's also going to work in Toronto. There's different regulatory environments. The customers are different. They might behave different. Just because we don't know why they're going to change and be different doesn't mean that they will or will not be different. So we have to assume that it's going to start as gray. That dictates how we enter the market and what we're going to, the way we revalidate our assumptions. Now, if it is a nearby square, it's going to go through gray, yellow to green very, very fast. If it's a far away square, it's going to take some time to move from gray to yellow to green. Okay, that's the foundation to how we're going to build our strategy. Obviously, we can't get to, obviously to start with, we have nothing that works. And our goal is to get to many things that work, but we have to go through the motions to get there. So first thing we do is we obviously start with our big vision. And our first goal is to start with get our first square, our first yellow square. It's still valuable to think as your whole market in terms of multiple squares. So we'll start considering, what are our customer segments? What are our customer problems? How can we break up our market? Like in our marketing example, when we have nothing that works, we want to make sure we're looking at squares, or at least considering squares that are far away from one another. Okay, so, you know, when Uber was starting, I wasn't there and I don't know, but I would assume they would have said, okay, our goal is to change transportation. Okay, how can we change transportation? They probably weren't debating, do we take Uber Black? Do we start Uber Black in San Francisco, Toronto, New York, Chicago, or Paris? That probably wasn't a question for them, because it probably didn't matter. Their question to themselves was, do we start with Uber X or do we start with Uber Black? Okay, I don't know what if Uber had that conversation with themselves, but Elon Musk with Tesla has stated that's how he started, right? His goal was always the Model 3. The Model 3. but he knew that he couldn't launch that model right away. So he was looking at, well, what other things can I launch to start with that will help us build up to the Model 3? The square that he picked was the Roadster square. You know, affluent people who wanted an electric vehicle, who had money to spend, and wanted it to look cool, etc. So you want to at least consider squares that are far away. So it's going to kind of look like that across your grid. You're also going to understand that all of your resources are in exploration mode. And when we're in exploration mode, we act differently than when we're in execution mode. And so we just want to consider that as we look to the habits that we're building as a company. The reason though why we want to look and consider far wide is because it allows us to say, oh, UberX, probably not where we want to start. So let's just cross that off the list. That sheer act of having that conversation with multiple people in the room gets people on alignment. Why don't you want to do UberX? Why shouldn't we do it now? That's our ultimate goal. That's our vision. Oh, it's too expensive. It's going to be too hard. It's quicker and easier if we control the vehicles with Uber Black, so on and so forth. All of those, that context that comes around that discussion is how you bring alignment to the team. It also allows you to step back and look at all of the different squares that you're considering and say, we assume these ones are going to get to green a lot faster than these other ones here. Again, why do we assume that? Having that discussion will surface a bunch of information that's relevant to your business. It will also force you to actually properly define what that square is. I'm not going to get into it, but then you're going to run a bunch of lean experiments. You're going to do a bunch of lean methodologies. There's lots of literature on how you do exploration work in an effective and efficient manner. The end result is you get to something that kind of works. And you have a bunch of squares that don't work yet, or that still don't work, but you're running experiments in it. This is where we get into a big trap as companies. So now we have something that kind of works, and our goal is to now get that to green as quickly and as effectively as we possibly can. The reason why this is a tricky part for people is to get here, we had to explore things that were far and wide in our vision. And that was actually really, really fun. And as entrepreneurs and founders, we're generally exploration people by nature. We don't like doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's boring for us. We generally like shiny object syndrome, where we like to do new things. We like to explore new things. We like to try new things. We like to solve problems. And problems for us is we have this massive vision that needs to be solved. And we've just found this little pocket that kind of works right now, but there's this rest of this vision. And we don't have the fortunate limitation that Uber had, where they had a geography limitation. When they launched in San Francisco with their UberX model, or sorry, their Uber Black model, every other city was going, oh my God, I want this now. And they had a limitation saying, well, I got to actually go get drivers over there. And it's a geographic limitation. Most of you don't have that problem. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have some semblance of success in banking. But insurance, oh, that's super easy. We just have to say yes to insurance. And to construction, oh, we just have to say yes to construction as well. And our solution will probably work for that. And we start doing all these other things. And then what happens though is we start realizing, oh, the features that construction are asking for are actually different than the ones banking is asking for, which is different than the ones insurance is asking for. And now we're going into triage mode. And that's what we're trying to avoid. What I'm not suggesting here is saying no to all customers. What I am suggesting is being clear internally on which features you're saying yes to. Oh, we're focused on banking right now. That's the one that's yellow and we want to get to green. Okay, all of our resources, or most of our resources, is going into banking. When people ask for other ones, they just go on the back burner. Unfortunately, we're not going to get them to get at them right now. We're also going to align our sales team on who we should be going after. Stop calling on banking customers, on construction customers, if all of our resources are going into banking at the moment. And this is the vision valley of death. And the reason why it's really painful for companies is you've generally, if you are on the venture track, you've generally raised your seed or your Series A round at this point in time. So you're all of a sudden flush with cash. You've got some semblance of success, and you think, man, I got to scale now. And you think scale means I've got to do everything. And so you look at all of these things that are far away from where you're currently having success, and you think, okay, I'm just going to treat all squares as equal, and I'm going to add my resources equally across all squares. Oh, I've got 2 slides the same minute. What we want to do is we want to focus our resources. We want to take that yellow square and we want to get it to a green as quickly as possible. Remember, yellow just means it's kind of working. And we want to actually get it to working, right? Uber didn't go from San Francisco and their black cars to New York, Chicago, and all of that until it was actually working for them. They were making millions of dollars a year in San Francisco with their black cars. They had their shit figured out before they went copy, paste, 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 paste. If you go copy, paste, paste, paste before you have it actually working, and this is largely around your internal operations, your messaging, your positioning, your product, it's the equivalent of going into a parking lot, tightening the bolts on your wheels by your hand, and driving around the parking lot and going, yeah, it kind of works. We're good. Let's go up on the highway and see what happens. The minute you get up to speed, all hell's going to break loose. Your wheels are going to come off. You're going to get in a massive accident. It's going to be painful for you. When you tighten your bolts properly in the parking lot and then go up onto the highway, everything goes smoothly, right? And that's what our goal is. What we want to do, though, is we don't want to just explore our one yellow square. We want to set ourselves up for the future as well. So we want to start looking at our nearby squares, right? And so again, Uber always wanted to change the transportation industry, but they only had limited resources. So once they got San Francisco up and running, they probably sent scouts out to figure out what cities are next. Which cities should we go to? And they probably scouted that, okay, other cities that are major cities that look a lot like San Francisco, how are we going to launch in them? And so they probably sent initial exploration teams to start figuring out which cities they're going to launch next. They probably started laying the groundwork. Maybe they had to get offices. Maybe they had to hire people. So they did some level of exploration in those new cities. They probably spent their exploration budget doing that rather than toiling away at how do I do Uber X? Maybe I can do this Uber Eats thing. That is things that are going to be put on the back burner. It was always on their mind, but they're not doing it just yet. And so figuring out how you're positioning your pieces around the board at this stage is very, very critical because we still have limited resources. Okay, now we get to something that actually works. We've got our green square. Hopefully we got here as fast as possible, but we've got a green square. We probably have some yellow squares, and we probably have some nearby gray squares. Now we're focused on basically what I call our production pipeline. How do we move things effectively and efficiently from gray to yellow to green? Because remember, just because it worked in San Francisco doesn't mean going to Chicago and Toronto and New York and Paris is going to work perfectly right off the bat. Things are going to change. Something's going to be different. And we need to refine our playbook as we go. And that's why you'll typically see companies that city expansion strategies are just easy to visualize because of the geographic nature. But this happens with everybody. But you'll see people that have city expansion strategies. They don't go from one city to every city in the world. They go from one city to probably 3 or 4 cities to probably 10 or 15 cities. Then they go to 50 cities all at once. What they're doing is they're refining their playbook as they start to scale it up. Every time you double something, you generally break something. And so Doubling allows you to grow exponentially, but you still have to go through those exponential milestones or those doubling milestones to figure out what's breaking inside of your system. Just the sheer fact of doubling your team and hiring people and coordinating them and getting them aligned, that's where things start breaking. This is where people don't quite understand it, and especially early stage, when you read TechCrunch and, unfortunately, all we talk about right now is the need to get to scale as fast as possible. So what happens is, and I see this happen far too often, we're a seed stage company. So we invest $1 million, $2 million into a company, or our companies raise $1 million to $2 million. And what do? They hire 10 salespeople from day one. So they go from founder-led sales, one salesperson, that was you as the founder, to 10 salespeople who have no idea anything that is going on. They have nothing written down, and salespeople are generally expensive, and they burn through their capital so fast, and with basically zero results. So when you are at something that works, however you got there, going from gray to yellow to green is where we're trying to build up our habits. We're trying to build up and refine our playbook and building this into a pipeline. Unfortunately, that takes a lot of resources. So we might now be 20, 30, 40, we might even be 50 people, but we probably still don't have that much budget to do long-term exploration. So think about this. You're having crazy success, okay? You only, as an exploration person, want to do everything in your vision. You're probably making millions of dollars a year. You're maybe, $2, $3, maybe even $5 million a year. And generally the right things to do at this point in time is hardening your company and building out your playbook, because you still haven't hit scale yet. And this is really, really hard for people to understand and have the fortitude to do that. The fortunate part, though, is getting to here doesn't have to take a long time. Some companies get here incredibly fast, and it's because they were really diligent to get here. Now we're at a stage of scale. So we have something that works. So we have a segment of the market that works, and we have a playbook that we can repeat over and over and over again. This is where things get really fun. We've got a bunch of green squares, we've got a bunch of yellow squares, we have a bunch of nearby gray squares, and we know how to move the gray squares to the yellow squares. We know how to move the yellow squares to the green squares in an effective manner. And remember, these things don't have to take time. Like, this could be weeks, months, they could be years. Every market is different, every company is different. But what also is important is when you're at this stage, you're probably 50 plus people. And so if we kind of say a general rule is we'd like to spend less than 20% of our budget on long-term exploration, at 50 people, a 20% budget is 10 people. That happens to be the size of a startup again. All of a sudden, we have an entire startup inside of our company that can go and do whatever it wants to do. Long-term exploration is basically a completely unknown return on investment, and therefore a very, very expensive use of our capital. Nearby exploration is a pretty good use of our capital, but it's still expensive because we're not 100% sure it's going to work like it worked before. Yellow squares, we kind of know what our return on investment is. It's just not perfectly repeatable or predictable at this point in time. Green squares, perfectly repeatable, and we're getting towards predictability. And so therefore it's a known return on investment. So once we start looking at it as known returns on investment, these decisions become a lot easier, because when I only have a couple $1 million in the bank, and my goal is to propel myself forward, because that's what I told my investors, or at least my board of directors, or at least my co-founders, or at least my significant other, or at least we want to get there effectively, efficiently as possible. That being said, there is the concept of portfolio theory. And so, in hindsight being 2020, There was very little risk for anybody when Bitcoin was first coming out to put less than 1% of their portfolio in Bitcoin. You probably wouldn't put 20%. You definitely wouldn't put 50 to 100% of it in there without taking massive, massive risk. But sometimes 1 to 20% of risk in there for potentially huge or better ROI payoffs than what you're currently doing is valuable. The challenge is that there's a minimum viable experiment that you can run. So what I mean by that is when I'm doing a marketing campaign, I can't spend $1 and test out a new platform. There's a minimum amount of money that I need to test out new platforms to see and guarantee, or sorry, to determine whether it works. For marketing campaigns, we're probably in the minimum in the hundreds of dollars, if not in the thousands of dollars. And so that dictates whether we can or can't afford to do long-term exploration. For startups, it's probably 3 to 5 people. Or sorry, for companies. You probably can't explore new initiatives that are very, very different than what you're currently doing with having less than 3 to 5 people. You can do recon with one person, but you can't actually go and solve a problem in there without 3 to 5 people. So if you can't afford less than 10 to 20% of your budget to have a team of 3 to 5 to 10 people, then you're better off spending that resources on near-term near-term exploration or actually execution or green squares. And this is how we just evolve our budget. But once we get into scale mode, we now have a repeatable way to bring money into the company. We have a bigger team. We can take a team, sequester it off. This is why big companies have labs or innovation hubs or whatever you want to call it. Is they're just taking small portions of their budgets. When you're massive companies like Apple, that looks like that's actually quite a large budget, but it's just a small percentage of their overall resources. And once we do that and we have these innovation teams, we just start back at the beginning. So we go back to the beginning as if we have nothing that works, and we can go back to looking far and wide. And we generally are starting to expand our vision. So we're either expanding the customer segments we look at, we're expanding the customer problems we're looking at, or we're trying innovative things. So we're actually trying to solve the same customer problems for the same customer segments in new types of solutions. So maybe we used spreadsheets and duct tape before, and now we're trying to use AI and blockchain and an innovative strategy. And we continue to just repeat the process. So we have our production pipeline here. We've got a massively expanded vision, and we think of it as just these startups that start back at stage 0 again, or stage 1, and take a gray square and try to expand it out. The nice thing is the bigger we get, the more of these smaller teams or startups that we have within our company, and the more multidimensional we get to explore. Which is why by the time companies blow up on TechCrunch and we see them as big, it looks like they're doing lots and lots of things. But it's because they have big teams. And so what they've taken is they've taken 10% to 20% of their budget, and they've just sent them far and wide in and across their vision, and they're exploring, and that's what they talk about. They don't really talk about that 90% of their company is doing the same old thing over and over and over again and just getting better at it. Okay, so getting better just means good habits. According to Wikipedia, a habit is routine, is a routine behavior that is repeated regularly. Our goal in green squares is to have a repeatable business. Yellow squares are kind of repeatable, and gray squares are not repeatable yet. This was, to be honest, a mindfuck for me. I used to think that business was all about these massive diving catches, right? The big showy things. We're super innovative. We've solved a crazy important problem in a super clever way, and this is why we're going to win. If you look at any successful company and you kind of start peeling back the layers and take away their innovation budget, they're extremely boring companies. They do the same thing over and over and over again, and they just keep getting better at it. They're very, very repeatable, right? Steve Blank talks about this. Your whole goal of a startup is to search for a repeatable business model. And if you can just replace repeatable with boring, it's just doing the same thing over and over and again. Companies can only go public when they have repeatability in their business model. The street only wants to see repeatability. So that's what our goal is. Two things need to be true to drive revenue. We've got to win customers and we got to deliver value to customers. Simple as that. Every company is exactly the same. So green squares just means that we can deliver value to customers in a repeatable way, and we can win customers in a repeatable way. Basically, there's nothing left for us to build. A yellow square just means we can deliver value to customers in a repeatable way, or we can win customers in a repeatable way, but not both. Therefore, we have something left to build. If we can't deliver value in a repeatable way or win customers in a repeatable way, then we're actually in a gray square and we have everything left to build, because still everything's an experiment. Something might kind of be working for us, but we're not able to repeatably deliver value to them or repeatably win customers for them, so it's not working. This is the biggest problem companies have, is they think they're in a yellow square or in a green square when they're still actually in a gray square or the one behind it, so the yellow square. The hurdle rates to move from gray to yellow to green are, by definition, very, very difficult and painful. These are your barriers to entry. So when people ask you like what your moat is, no longer are moats technical moats for most companies. Okay, Elon Musk with SpaceX, Peter Diamandis with trying to mine asteroids, fine. There's probably some technical moats there that are very, very difficult to overcome, and it's very expensive to do. This adds one level of hurdle rate. In today's world, for 90+% of the companies that I see as an investor, it's this concept of repeatability that's really the moat. Where companies get in trouble is when they think they're one stage ahead of where they actually are and start acting like that company. It's when you start burning capital too fast. It's when you start making the wrong decisions, and it's when you start actually misaligning your team and getting start getting chaos happening or tension happening inside your company, and you actually start burning your employees out. So what are our habits to win customers? They're really just your inbound tactics, your outbound tactics, and your referral tactics. And we can kind of start unraveling that, right? So your inbound tactics might be your content marketing engine. It might be your paid marketing campaigns, and they get endless, and you could get a large number of them. If you read anything about content marketing or about inbound marketing, the general rule of thumb is the same rule as squares. Try to find one tactic and get it to kind of working, and then get it to working. Master one tactic at a time. Don't try to do a bunch of tactics poorly. However, when you don't have any tactic that works, consider all your tactics that you could work and look far and wide. If you have the budget, run a bunch of experiments in parallel. If you don't have the budget, pick the best one and run them serially. You just use the same concept of squares and the same strategy at the tactic level. Same thing. You don't need inbound, outbound, and referral tactics right away. But if you don't know what's going to work, try all of them. Once you have one that works, start doubling down on it. Get it to yellow, get it to green. Once you have it to green, look at nearby tactics. Once those get to green and your budget gets bigger, Then you can start exploring all of these tactics far and wide, or yeah, it's related to your budget on how many tactics you can do. To do any one of the tactics well, paid campaigns on Facebook versus LinkedIn, content marketing, webinars, outbound tactics, BDR sales, enterprise sales, partnerships, all your referral tactics, social, all of these things take a massive amount of effort to do them well, which takes resources. And so it's related, the amount you can do is related to the resources you have. But if you don't have any that work, we want to at least be considering far and wide. And then you ask yourself, is it repeatable? Is it kind of repeatable? Is it not repeatable yet? My definition of repeatability when we get down to the tactic level is generally, if I can do it more than 10 times, ideally more than 100 times, then it's repeatable. It's kind of repeatable if I can do it more than 3 times. And when I say more, I mean successes. So if I can do a campaign and I can get more than 3 customers, more than 10 customers, that tells me whether I'm in green or yellow. If I can't do that, then it's gray. And this is where we get ourselves out of diving catches. Repeatability is also related to individual tactics. So what I mean by that is the reason why I pick 3 and 10 is doesn't matter what kind of company you are, that rule applies. So if you're an enterprise sales company, you probably don't have that many customers. And that's why enterprise sales is so hard to scale. But if you're a consumer product, 3 and 10 is super small numbers. And so you don't want to say, okay, well, all of my tactics are above 3 and 10 because I can do that in a single minute by just launching a bunch of campaigns. So in that stage, that just tells us that's the minimum numbers for our first tactic that works. After that, we're going to pick which one works the best. And that one's going to be our North Star. So if I have a Facebook campaign and repeatability for Facebook is I can win customers, I can win 100 customers per day out of Facebook. And I look at my LinkedIn marketing campaign, and I'm only at 10. Well, that one's actually still gray because related to my business, Facebook is working for me and it's repeatable. In comparison, LinkedIn is not working and it's doing 1/10 as well. So therefore it's gray. So I'm better off putting more of my resources in Facebook that's already working rather than chasing the LinkedIn campaigns and trying to make that one work if I have limited resources. Okay, what are our habits to deliver value to customers? Well, we have a bunch of tactics that initially deliver value to customers, and we have a bunch of tactics that deliver value over time to customers. And we may use different products across different mediums to deliver value to customers. So we might have information products, we might have services related products, and we might have software related products that are solving the same customer segments and the same customer problems. For each of those, are they repeatable? Are they kind of repeatable? Are they not repeatable yet? And how does it relate to each of the ones that I have within my portfolio? That tells me where I should double down on. And if I have resources left over, then I can start exploring to my gray squares. Okay, what does a strategy plan look like? When I say a strategy plan, I'm really talking about you do a company offsite with your executive team, and you come up with a strategy and you want to present it back to your company, your board, your investors in due diligence. You want to update this quarterly, so it's the quarterly review you do. If you do OKRs, it's kind of your OKRs. So what does this PowerPoint or Word document or whatever means you use to communicate it, what does it look like? You can think of it in sort of 4 easy and big sections. For where we came from, so what did we do last year if it's a yearly plan? What we believe, where are we going, and how are we going to get there? That's basically the fundamentals of a strategy. So that's your last year's review, it's your vision and mission, it's generally your revenue goals, and for most companies, it's their action plans that they're going to put forth. It's this structure, and it's specifically the action plans and jumping from revenue goals straight to action plans that get people into trouble. If you're generally better, you probably broke your revenue goals into operational goals, and your action plans are broken up in departments and products. Where people get the biggest problem though, is people have a real hard time linking actions back to higher level goals. Why am I building this feature? What am I doing with this feature? Why are we building this feature and not this feature? We have so many features to build. How do we pick which feature we build as it relates to our revenue goal? It's this huge disconnect. Generally, coming up with a high level goal, really easy. Generally, executing a feature, really easy. Connecting your high level goal to the feature you're trying to execute, this is where strategy breaks down for most companies. If you're kind of good, or if you're better, you're using some form of OKRs. If you're not familiar with OKRs, objectives and key results, invented by Intel, popularized by Google, everybody in the Valley seems to talk about it these days. Most people do it really poorly. I did it really poorly when we first tried to implement it. You're doing it poorly, in my opinion, if your key results are changing quarter over quarter. Okay, so what we did objectives, super easy. This is what I want to do, right? It's not really hard. You start at the top and they're supposed to cascade down. So you start at the top and you say, my revenue goal is to make $1 million a year. Then you generally, for every objective, you want to have 3 to 5 key results that tell us whether we're making progress to those goals. What we did, and what most people do when they first try to do OKRs, is they set their key results as action items. I'm going to launch this product. I'm going to try out webinars. I'm going to do things I am going to do, and generally they're new things that I'm going to do. And this is where we got ourselves into trouble. And so what happens is we do our first quarter and we're like, oh, we didn't get to our objective. Okay, let's do our next quarter. Okay, our objective stays the same, but all of our KRs need to change. And we got to switch out all of our KRs. And we just kept doing that over and over and over again. So what that usually looks like is, as a strategy plan, is where we came from is usually we did a good job. What we believe is we need to have some big giant vision. So for Uber, it's we change the transportation around the world. Where we're going, get to $100 million. If we're better, we say 10,000 rides or more. We're usually very excited about all of this stuff as well, hence all my exclamation marks. This is their strategy session that we do an offsite, and it's a rah, rah, rah thing. And then where it breaks down, it's like, okay, we're gonna do more marketing. We're gonna do more drivers. We want more stability. So those are our OKRs. And we wanna go launch an Android app, okay? So what usually happens, and this is a ridiculous example just to kind of to highlight the point, but marketing will go, oh, we need more customers. So I'm gonna run a campaign in Arizona, because we said we were gonna change transportation around the world. Operations goes, I'm gonna try to onboard drivers in San Francisco, because that's where I'm actually working right now. Support goes, oh my God, our iOS app just keeps crashing. Engineering goes, we need to support all platforms. I'm gonna build an Android app. And the executives say something completely ridiculous, like we're gonna grow by winning the mid-market. And this happens all the time in a company. So how do we align everybody on strategy? So if that's kind of what generally happens, how do we get people into alignment? First thing is we need to get specific on the squares we're going after. So if I actually was specific to the team and I said, well, we're actually targeting North America, US, San Francisco, affluent riders, and Apple iOS only. That was Uber's first market. Up until they were making $1 million, they only did San Francisco, affluent riders with their car, and specifically iOS only. They didn't actually launch their Android app until I think it was 2009 or 2010. And they were basically making $1 million. Now, if I look at the total addressable market for that market, it's $10 to $30 million. I'm trying to make $1 million, which means I have less than 10% of the market. If I can't if I can't win 10% of a market, I'm still not even the market leader at 10% of the market. I have no business being in the market if I can't be the leader or at least the second leader in the market. And so this is where we have this wrong idea, I believe, that to make $1 million, you need to be in a $1 billion market. To make $1 million, you need to be in a $10 million market or tens of millions of dollar market. And the reason why that's important is it brings focus and alignment to the company. So if I were to add just this one concept to my strategy plan, all of a sudden marketing goes, oh yeah, I need to run my marketing campaigns in San Francisco. Operations, well, they had boots on the ground, and same with support, so they were sort of spot on. But engineering goes, oh, actually, I don't need to support all platforms. We're in a $10 million market with iOS, and we only need to make $1 million. We're not even at $1 million yet. I actually need to fix our iOS app. And don't worry, we have lots of runway to make the money that we want to. And the executives, they're not even going to be talking about mid-market anymore. They're not even talking about the long-term vision because they know that they can make their revenue goals from the market that they're in and get everybody aligned and everybody rowing in the same direction, which is what we're trying to do. So the two things that are missing from our strategies in general are prioritized habits and specific segments. So when you write your OKRs, your KRs should be in terms of habits. When your KRs are in terms of habits, they don't change quarter over quarter. We just update the numbers. If my goal was to get into shape, either lose weight or gain weight, my objective will be, I need to gain 10 pounds. Rather than talk about a bunch of busy work and activities that I'm going to do and being super specific, I'm going to talk about them in terms of key results. I'm going to talk about them my key results in terms of habits. What are the habits that need to be true for me to hit my objective? Well, I've got to eat properly. I've got to exercise properly, and I've got to drink lots of water. I can describe my habits though, or I can measure my habits because one of the things OKRs requires is that it's measurable. So I can measure them, but I want to pick a period that's less than my quarterly rate. I don't want to say, and I'm going to eat this many good meals in the quarter. Because every time I look at that number, if I say it in just at the quarter level, that number is going to always go up, and I feel like I'm always getting closer to my goal. So I want a shorter measurement period so that every time I check into my numbers, I know whether I'm on track or not. So I want to eat 3 good meals a day. I want to work out 5 times a week. I want to drink 8 glasses of water a day. That means every week I check in, I can see how well I'm doing against my goal. What also is going to happen is those are my ideal states. I'm not going to actually be there. So what's going to really happen is after about a week, or so after about a month, or at the end of the quarter, I'm going to get my actual baseline average. So I'm going to be at 2.2 meals a day. I'm going to be at 4.6 exercise workouts per week, and I'm going to be at 5.5 glasses of water a day. Okay. Now I can get to work at improving myself. Okay. And that means quarter over quarter, all my efforts go into ratcheting my baselines up towards my ideal, but they don't change. So my team doesn't feel whiplash. They don't, every time I come back to with a new quarterly plan, they're not like, where did this come from? Okay. I'm showing them a level of consistency. That is my goal for alignment and aligning my team. How I work out, what meals I do is up to me as the person executing the key result. So if the gym is closed, it's no reason for me to say, I can't do it. I can go running. I can do push-ups. I can run on the spot. There's lots of ways I can achieve my goal, and I can leave it up to the team. Now, sometimes my direct habits, I don't have enough predictability, or I don't know which ones to choose yet to put them as key results, and I'm still in exploration stage. What we want to do from a key result standpoint then is we want to go into indirect habits. So direct habits will influence our goal directly. So again, for a healthy lifestyle, that's going to be eating, working out, and exercising, and water. For our companies, that's going to be winning customers and delivering value to customers. Those are our direct habits. Indirect habits are things that support our direct habits. So if I want to eat well and exercise consistently and drink lots of water, well, I got to be in a good state of mind. I got to be well rested. If I'm tired, I'm just going to be, I'm too tired. I'm not going to do it. If I'm stressed, I'm probably not going to eat well. If I don't have proper food in the house, I'm not going to eat well. I'm going to default to other things. So I have to do a bunch of work to set my foundation or my environment up for success. Those are habits as well. For companies, those indirect or supporting habits are your engineering sprints, your daily stand-ups, your learning events that you do. These are habitual things that you do week over week, day over day, month over month, quarter over quarter. This is what we want to focus on as our key results to keep our team aligned. That will turn closer towards our direct habits and getting to things that are somewhat repeatable and then actually repeatable. We also want to get specific on our segments. So we want to get very, very detailed on what our segments are so that the team knows what we're building, what we're saying yes to, and what we're saying no to. Like I said before, squares doesn't mean you say necessarily no to customers or no to money. It just means you know how to prioritize someone's feature request. If you have nothing left to do to support your green square, great. That means we have resources available and we get squares. You can determine on which squares you want to explore. Are they nearby or are they far away? But if the only thing you can think about doing and there's nothing left on your plate is a far away square that's super different than what you're currently doing, then either fire those people and reallocate those resources or start exploring that far away square. Understanding your squares and being specific on them and trying to limit your focus is just about aligning your team on what should be done and giving them the tools to understand how they say yes to things and no to things. So how do we define our squares in more detail? Okay, squares are defined by what I call lenses and filters. Lenses are a view of the world, and filters are optional views that we can reduce the size of the world. The whole point of segmentation is to reduce the size of our market by segmenting it. Squares are defined by multiple lenses at a time. This is the part that a lot of people have a hard time thinking about. We all think about, hey, I segmented my market, and we think about it in terms of a single dimension. I segmented it by city, I segmented it by industry, so by geography, by industry, by demographic, something like that. That's how we talk about segmentation right now. But if we look at Uber, we could segment based on region, city density, income, pickup and drop off locations, current solutions, and they all apply at the exact same time. The filters that go along with these lenses for region, it's around the world, city density. We can look at it in terms of big cities, medium cities, small cities, income, different income brackets, pickup and drop off locations. This was an interesting one for me. So if Uber defined their market not based on users, but based on number of rides, which is sort of their unit economics, when I first started with Uber, I used it to go to the airport all the time. That was the value for me. I didn't have to pre-call my call. I was traveling a lot at the time and usually on early morning flights. So I didn't have to call the night before to arrange my airport pickup or run around the streets of Toronto to try to find a cab in the morning. I could just open the app and order my app. I never used Uber to go home from the airport. They didn't have anywhere to stop. Uber didn't have relationships at the time with the airports. There wasn't a designated place for them to stop. Basically, you couldn't get Uber to pick you up at the airport. There's no way to coordinate with them. That means that that doesn't work. So we need to be careful to understand how we segment the market and all of these optional filters that we look at. Sometimes we care about them, sometimes we don't. So segments or different squares are just turning on and off different filters. It's always the same lenses, it's just different filters. Sometimes the filters apply to one square and not to another square. Sometimes they apply to all squares. So I might have one square for Uber that is Uber Black. So that would be airport cars, limos as competitors, 100K plus, big cities, North America. But I don't care about pickup and I don't care about drop-off locations. Or I could have Uber Black, but in a European city, so in Paris. Everything else, though, is exactly the same. Or I might have another square, which is Uber X, which is yellow cabs, less than $100,000, but still only going after big cities, North American and Europe, all pickup locations, all drop-off locations. How do you define your lenses? Is really you start with simple questions. Who are your customers? What do you help them do? And how do they do those things today? Then to get to your filters, what are your options? Who are your customers? You might talk about them in terms of geography, in industry, demographics, or psychographics. And then you can just ask, what are my options? What geographies could I be in? What industries could I be in? What demographics might I go after? Describing your customer problems, the answers that you describe as your customer problems are going to be limited to or be able to categorize as the situations your customers are trying to solve those problems in, the motivations that they have to solve those problems, or the expected outcomes that they have of the solutions that are trying to solve those problems. When you describe the current solutions, you're either going to describe their current environment that they're trying to solve that problem in, the behaviors that they are exhibiting as they try to solve that problem, or the alternatives or other solutions that they are using to solve that problem. So if we look at Uber, I can describe Uber's markets by region, city density, population, language, income, occupation, lifestyles, communities, the pickup and drop-off locations, the distances that I'm traveling. So 8 years after Uber started, the only closest competitor, which was a distant second, was Lyft. Nobody would have thought, or at least I didn't think, that there was room for 2 more unicorns in the on-demand ride market. However, Lime and Bird started up and went from 0 to unicorn status in, I think, less than 2 years in the on-demand market. And why was that? Well, they segmented their market based on distance. It turns out Uber works really well from 1 to 50 kilometers, but anything from 0 to 1 kilometer, they actually didn't work really well. And Lime and Bird, as the scooter market, exploited that segment of the market. Similarly, 50 kilometers and more, you're probably better off renting a car or owning a car if you're trying to travel those types of distances. So Uber had a sweet spot. Now, whether they knew that or didn't know that, and whether they knew Lime and Bird were trying to enter the market and they were like, I don't care, I have no idea, I wasn't there. But these types of things and these lenses are super important to us to understand, and understanding the filters that are a part of that lens really impacts our every part of our company. It impacts our strategy, but it also impacts what we're trying to build. The perception, the speed, the cost, the lead time I have to call before I order my car, the current solutions, the device type that I'm on. I already mentioned that Uber stayed with just iOS devices for quite some time. Too often a company tries to start up and they're just like, oh, we got to support all platforms. I have 0 customers, but before I get started, I need to support every single platform that's out there. I've just doubled or tripled my investment requirement versus just saying, well, I'm going to stay on this one until I get a certain number of customers and it's not profitable, but it's worthwhile for me before I start moving to my other platforms. Multiple platforms is probably not the reason why we're not getting traction in the marketplace. The usage frequency and habits might be important to me. These things dictate and inform often not necessarily our product, but our marketing messages, our sales activities, where we go, who we talk to, how we talk to our customers. You know, the fact that my usage frequency for Uber early on was because I was a business traveler. Started to, you know, when I started reading articles about how good it is, you don't have to call ahead for your car in the morning when you're traveling every week and blah, blah, blah. These messages resonate with me and make me pay attention a lot more. So a lot of these lenses might be linked together and related, but it gives you a different lens to think about your problems. Your current solutions, your frustrations, all of these things are ways we can segment the market. Now, interestingly, lenses and filters are actually just your vision. Who is your customer segments? What are your customer problems? And how are your solutions, or the solutions that they're currently using? So the interesting thing is by getting specific on our segment is actually defining our vision much more detailed than a single liner. So yes, we have a nice single line vision that we can rally around and it's nice and fun and exciting. But when we actually need to go and turn a vision or a goal into execution, so strategy into execution, the specifics of it matter significantly. So we need a language to define out those specifics. And lenses and filters give us that language to do it because it relates directly one-to-one back to our vision. Sadly, this means that the simple visual that I've given you of a 2x2 matrix isn't true. You can't draw out, you might be able to draw out your big giant vision as a 2x2 matrix that you put on a slide deck for your investors. But when you try to actually put it into language for your team and actually get specific, you can't draw it out in a 2x2 matrix because there's all these lenses and filters that are applying at the same time. So over time, the understanding of lenses and filters is going to grow. By no means do I think you need to get started with all of the lenses and all of the filters and understanding every single one of them. Quite frankly, your 2x2 matrix is probably the best place for you to start getting started. Then you're going to go and do a bunch of learning activities. Remember, learning activities is one of our indirect habits that support our direct habits. And it's where you're going to start when you have nothing that works. It's the only thing that matters. The only KR that you should be having in the early days is learning. What you're going to be doing is you're going to go out and you're going to learn and do customer interviews. You're going to do surveys. You're going to talk to experts. You're going to do things yourself. People are going to use your product and you're going to do user testing. You're going to look at your data. Every learning activity that you get back is either a lens or a filter. You either learn something that is a view of your world, or you learn something that can be used as an option that you can say, I want to do that, or I don't want to do that. Everything is a lens and a filter, which means these lenses and filters are going to grow over time. And all lenses and all filters is your vision or your entire market. Remember, a square or a segment is just turning on and off some of these lenses and filters and combining them, which also means that the amount of segments we can create is virtually limitless. So we got to be careful. Now, like squares, filters can have states. I have filters that work, filters that kind of work, filters that don't work yet. So like I said, getting picked up at home, a restaurant, at my office, super easy. It always worked for Uber. Getting picked up at the airport, for the longest time, it didn't work. That's okay. I still used it as an Uber customer. I was still using Uber, and I was still a very happy customer. So we don't always have to have everything working at the same time. At some point, Uber had to have a conversation though. Do we want to make this work? Do we not want to make this work? These are the conversations that we're going to have, but understanding your state is the first step. What currently works, what currently kind of works, and what currently doesn't work yet. And remember, working is relative to you as a company when we look at the granular level of filters. We have most of our customers coming from here. We have some of our, but not very many customers coming from here. My general rule from a relative standpoint is take your largest one. If it's half as much, take your largest one. Take your smallest one. If it's in the middle, it's kind of works. The other ones are kind of works. If it's relatively closer to the bigger one, it's green. If it's closer to the grayer one, the smallest one, it's gray. Everything's relative, and our goal is to double down on the things that work with our resources first. And this is how we can prioritize what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. Splitting out our filters based on things that work, kind of work, and don't work is really how we translate to squares. And we can create squares of all different shapes and sizes. They don't have to be all green in one and all yellow in the other, and so forth. It's sort of out of scope of this webinar, but I will be publishing more and more content of, how do you make this work? There's internal views of things that work, but then there's market share views of things that work. I recommend to at least always get started with at least your internal view. So these are things that are working for us. Let's do more of it. But there's also, how well are we doing in the marketplace? That kind of gives us some better views of what should we be doing, how should we be about things. At the very least, just getting specific on what are these lenses and filters is very simple. And think about your two most important squares. All your green ones is this square works the best. It's where we're already winning. So the question becomes, how far can we push this? Can we get creative on how we prospect? Like I said, we usually don't have a product problem. We usually have a prospecting problem. If you spent like one day just brainstorming, how can you go find more customers that exhibit these behaviors and figure out how far you can push that segment of the market? Generally, you'll be surprised that you can push it a lot further than you think. Sometimes that even just gets you straight to your goal. And remember, your goal is your goal. Your goal today or for this year is not to be a multi-billion-dollar company. I guarantee you can't go from where you probably are right now to a multi-billion-dollar company unless you're close to a billion-dollar company already. You have to go through the motions. And so your goal is probably in the order of a couple million dollars. My guess is that the square that you have that's already working or kind of working, you can probably hit that goal with a lot of room for error. So focusing most of your resources there is probably where you want to start getting specific. The other thing that's very valuable though is lopping off a huge section of your market. We can tackle this later. So if anybody shows up in this side of the market, that's just considered far away from what we're currently doing, and we just don't want to do it. Putting those two guardrails up for your team will probably solve 50 to 80% of all of your uncertainty inside of your company. Inside of this quarter, this is the square we're really going after. We think most of our money is going to come. That are just offside. We're going to do most of our things here, which is going to probably consume 60 to 80% of our resources. We're not going to do any of these things. Everything else left open for debate. We'll make a game time decision. Okay, we're kind of getting to the end. How do we keep things up to date? This is really a quarterly plan. Every quarter, you're going to review your lenses because you're going to learn new things. Your lenses inform your backlog. So you're going to update your backlog. You're going to review your habits. The good news is they rarely change. And so they're going to stay relatively constant. You're going to update your status. Green, yellow, gray states will change quarter over quarter. You're going to update your square definitions. Maybe the square you thought you should be in isn't the one that you really want to be in. Maybe the gray one that you were exploring isn't the right one. Maybe your yellow one isn't the right one. Maybe your green one isn't the right one anymore. You're going to update your definitions. Maybe your square was $100 million before, but you've learned more things now. And so now you're going to break that $100 million square into multiple $10 million squares. Then you're going to start at the top. What's your revenue goal? You're going to look through your lenses. You're going to look through your squares. And you're going to update your resource allocation. How are we going to move our chips around the board? And then you're going to let your teams build their operational plans. What actions are we going to do? The other thing that we're going to do is anytime there's a massive tectonic shift in the market, generally these things are out of your control. Customers change their behavior. Competitors change their behaviors. Regulatory environments change. Your partners change their behavior. COVID-19 happens. When anytime something like this happens and it impacts our business, we follow the exact same process. We review our lenses and update our backlog under the new context. So specifically around COVID-19, we might have to change the way we're looking at our lenses and our backlog. We review our habits. We update our green, yellow, and gray states, square definitions. We probably are updating our revenue goal, and then we're moving chips around the board again and building out our operational plan. Oftentimes, these things change the status of your squares. COVID-19 happens. If you had exposure to small businesses or travel, you got decimated. So if you were green there before, you're yellow. You might actually even be gray now in that square. So it might move you backwards. It might also change the size of your square. So if you were an airline, for the next year, your square went from a very big square to a very small square. It's painful for companies, but it happens, and you need to adjust your plan accordingly. It might also change the size of your square in a good way. Zoom's market exploded because of COVID-19. So sometimes these things are accelerators, and sometimes these things are detractors for you. You need to understand what they are and adjust accordingly. That's it. I don't know. I have more time, so I don't know if we have a hard stop at 11, and I apologize, it went an hour and a half. But I'm happy to answer some.
Amazing. Thanks, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. That was awesome. Took a lot away from that, and I know I don't have a hard stop on mine either. If you guys do have a hard stop, feel free to jump off. But if we want to stay on maybe for 5-10 minutes, does anybody have any questions for Mike right now? Feel free to put it in the chat or just go off mute and for the group. Yeah, Owen.
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation today. And actually, how can I judge or measuring? Do we have a creation point of it? So for example, how many users in it or how many sales a month, like that. So in points of the scares.
Yeah, so like I said, every company is going to be different on what works, what kind of works and what doesn't work. Your initial hurdle rate, in my mind, is if you can do it more than 3 times, you're starting to get to you're starting to have some data to learn from. If you can get to more than 10 times, then you have more data to learn from. What I recommend, though, is what is the period it takes you to get to those 3 or 10 times? Does it take you a year to get there? Does it take you a month to get there, a week to get there, a day to get there? Okay. If you don't have a significant share of the market, then we have to look from our internal company perspective. Okay. So when we have nothing that works, the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to get something to 3, but it's still not very good. So from our perspective, it's kind of getting yellow in comparison. Like if we have one thing that's getting to 3 and nothing else is getting to 3, then okay, it kind of works for us. Nobody else cares. No, the world doesn't care about it, but it kind of works for us. Okay. But that's 3 in our lifetime. So it's kind of still pretty crappy. So our first goal is to, can we get that to 3 monthly, 3 weekly? We generally want to be less than a quarter because now we're learning at a rate that we can make changes on. That's helpful for us. If we've blown past 10 per week per day or whatnot, we'll start ratcheting that number up. Okay, and then we're going to compare everything else against it. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Anybody else right now? And all good. Okay. Mike, maybe we'll leave it there then. But again, thank you so much. And I know I've seen presentations a couple times. I know it was all on a whiteboard, but just to say that you've done an amazing job of putting it all into a presentation. So that was great. It was great.
Yeah, my tactic that used to work doesn't work anymore because of COVID, the whiteboard. So I had to spend a bunch of time doing more stuff.
Philip was with us yesterday, and he had his mini whiteboard, and he was still. But
he's smart. It's kind of hard in the mountains here, but
that's it. Sounds good. All right, we'll leave it there. But Mike, thanks again, everyone. Thank you for joining. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all next week.
Great. Thanks. It was nice to meet everybody. Ciao.
Thanks, Blake. Thanks, Michael.